You guys wondering how long I'm going to have pants hanging in the back seat? That was for a wedding. This shit got so hot that the the coat hanger melted. Oh man, that's warm. And it's not even that hot yet. I don't even think it's reached 120 yet this summer. YouTube theologians, hey, want to hear something cool? Okay, so St. Paul brought up the topic of hope this morning in Ephesians 2 when he says, and I've been thinking about this since we did the worldwide Bible study on hope back before I got the COVID. That's like a year and a half ago. We started that worldwide Bible study on, and we're talking about hope. And one of the things that Paul says is that the Gentiles have no hope. Now that's pretty strong words. Them's fighting words. He says it in Ephesians 2, verse 12, where he says, before, when you were pagan, before you were Christian, you were aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers from the promises of the covenant, and without hope and without God in the world. Now, we've talked about that before, you and I. You, dear YouTube theologian. Of course, I pretend like you've seen everything I put online, 40 bajillion hours of nonsense. Yeah, now, so maybe it won't hurt to bring it back up, in case you forgot. No, because there's no chance you never saw it. This is, are your kids saying that word now? Sheesh. I'm working on it, so I don't sound, we got the Higher Things Youth thing coming up in a week, so sheesh. So Paul says that before you were a Christian, you didn't have any hope. Sheesh, Paul, because that's hard words. But he repeats it. He says in Thessalonians, 1 Thessalonians 4, 13-ish, he says, we do not mourn as those who have no hope. No hope. Now, I was reading an old encyclopedia of religion on hope. And it said that hope was barely ever talked about amongst the pagans. So if you go back to the pagan philosophers and you try to find them talking about hope, it's like mum's the word, or maybe it was a silly thing. If you know better than that, if you know better than my old encyclopedia of religion, and you know where the ancient pagans talked about hope, then please comment or send me a note. I'd like to find that out. In fact, if you could do it this week, it'd be great, because I'm supposed to talk about hope in Chicago next Saturday night at the Issues Etc. conference, which is gonna be great. They only gave me an hour. And then they said that 45 minutes and then Q&A. 45 minutes? All right. It'll be like the debate, they cut you off. That'll be wonderful. So if you know how the pagans talked about hope before, then that would be that'd be really helpful. But Paul says the pagans have no hope, and the reason is because they have, there's nothing past death for them. If anything good's going to come, it's going to come in this life. There's no goodness in the life beyond. And the Christian has hope, which means that, and we have this extended horizon of hope, that our hope extends past death, past the grave, past our last breath, past our heart stopping, past all that, past your funeral. Your hope goes past your funeral to the life to come, to everlasting life in heaven, and to the resurrection, which in the new heaven and the new earth, where the righteous dwell, where there's no more death or sorrow or crying or anything like this. We have this extended horizon of hope in Christ, which makes us different than the world. So that Peter, when he says you got to give a defense to everyone who asks, he says, for the hope that's in you. For the hope, because the world is going to accuse us of being hopeful. Would that would be the case. Dear Christians, let's be persecuted by the world for having so much hope in Christ. Does that sound like a good plan? It sounds like a good plan to me. Always be ready to give an answer to those who ask for the hope that's in you. Having a good conscience. Paul does that. If you look at Paul in the book of Acts, there's 7 sermons, and 4 of them are in jail. I mean, one when he's getting arrested in Jerusalem and the soldiers are like carrying him on top of their heads, and he's preaching from the pulpit of the soldier arms. And then So the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, and then the sermon in front of Felix, and then the sermon in front of Festus. I can't remember those. I get all those two guys back and forth in my imagination. And then the sermon in Rome when he's in prison in Rome. So the last 4 sermons of Paul are more like courtroom addresses. And in all 4 of them, he says, the reason why I'm having so much trouble is because of the hope of Israel. I'm here because of the hope of Israel, Jesus and the resurrection. Prisoners, we should all be prisoners of hope. You're persecuting me because I hope in Jesus. And the world can't stand our hope because, number 1, it doesn't have any hope. And number 2, our hope is their judgment. That's the problem. But, okay. Anyway. You, Christian, can look out at your friends and neighbors and say, they got no hope. They might not even know they don't have hope. They might hope for good things in this life, but that's it. It's over after that. Kaput. It's done. We, on the other hand, have hope. Now, here's something cool. This is all build up to this cool thing I was reading this morning, which was Martin Luther on Galatians 5:5. Someone remind me, and I'll post this section from Luther Galatians on the old blog, put a link to it. I got a public domain version of the greater Galatians commentary. Remember Luther was talking about Galatians, he had 2 commentaries, one in I think 1517, the other one, or 1519, that's lesser Galatians. The greater Galatians is 1531 or 5. And in his commentary on Galatians 5:5, he's talking about the difference between faith and hope. Now why? Is because that verse says something like, we through faith wait for the hope of the righteousness of God. We through faith wait for the hope of the righteousness of God. And Luther says, okay, what's the difference between faith and hope? And he says it's oftentimes very difficult to distinguish. I've heard it defined like this. Hope is faith directed to the future, which is kind of nice. But Luther says faith has to do with the truth, and hope has to do with the good. Faith has to do with the mind, and hope has to do with the will. Faith, you remember the 4 cardinal virtues, which are wisdom, temperance, justice, and courage. Wisdom, temperance, justice, and courage. Yeah, those are the 4 cardinal virtues. Luther says faith is spiritual wisdom, prudence, and hope is spiritual courage. That is pretty cool. That is really something to think about. Faith, Luther says, is a teacher, busy fighting heretics. Hope is a captain, mustering the troops to endure crosses and affliction and tribulation. I determined, by the way, I realized when I was reading that this morning that I don't use that language of crosses. The Christian faces crosses. Trouble, tribulation, affliction, I use all those words, but crosses is the word that we should use because that reminds us that our trouble and affliction and all this sort of stuff is connected to Jesus and his suffering and death. So I made something like a little vow this morning. You guys got to hold me to it. That I would preach more. I would use the language of bearing the cross more in my sermons. And take up your cross and follow me. That's what Jesus says. This is the afflictions of the Christian. So I tried, I think, in both sermons this morning to talk about how Jesus comes to us to give us hope in the midst of crosses. So hope is what musters the troops to endure all this affliction, which is why patience and affliction and hope are connected to one another. Rejoice in suffering, Paul says to the Romans, after he told them that having been justified by faith, they have peace with God, which you think meant maybe that's when you end the book. But no, he keeps going. That's only chapter 5, verse 1, and he says, and also this, we rejoice in our suffering, to which we say, Paul, wait a minute, what are you talking about? We rejoice in our suffering, knowing that suffering produces patience, patience produces character, and character character produces hope. There it is. And hope doesn't disappoint, because God has poured his Spirit into our hearts. So that we want to have hope, spiritual courage. I think I might talk about some of these things on Saturday at the Issues Conference. So if you're listening to this and you're going to the Issues Etc. Conference, just forget about that I said those things. And then on next Saturday, be like, wow, we've never heard that before. So I think there's something there about courage, that hope is a rallying cry to the goodness of the Scriptures. Paul says to the Romans, this is how he ends his book of Romans. Well, not quite. I mean, just in chapter 15, but he says, may the God of all hope fill you with joy and peace in believing. Can you believe that verse? That verse is like, you know those things that they do at like wedding receptions now, where they get like a skewer and they put all the best fruits on them? Like you get a piece of pineapple, and you get a piece of strawberry, and you get a piece of grape, and you get a piece of mango. And then they, like, sometimes they do the filler fruits, like the melons, which I always try to pawn off on the kids. But that verse is like a skewer with all the sweetest fruit on it. The God of all hope fill you with joy and peace in believing. That's so great. The fruit skewer verse. Because our God is a God of hope. He makes promises and He keeps them. And He gives us those promises. And they, like a buoy in the conscience, just lift us up to joy and peace. So may it be this way for you. May the God of hope fill you with joy and peace. Oh, God be praised. Sunday drive. I was driving to church this morning. I was reminded that I should remind you guys every once in a while, or I just thought that I remembered, that's what the thing is called doing. I remembered that it would be helpful if you guys comment or you like the video or subscribe, or when you engage with the video, then YouTube says, oh, people like the video, and so they share it with more people. So that'd be great if you think about doing that. If you're not subscribed, you can hit the subscribe and jump into the conversation that's there. And I try to look at those every now and again. So that's great. So you can do that there. There is still room, by the way, I think, for this Issues Etc. conference. That's the parable, you know. There is still room. If you guys don't sign up, then they're just going to go out on the streets of River Forest or whatever and compel people to come in. I think I heard they had like 25 to 30 spots open still. So use coupon code Wolfmueller and see what happens. I think someone's got to do that. Use coupon code Wolfmueller. Because if I can just make up coupon codes for things, that's kind of cool. Try coupon code Wolfmueller when you check out at CPH and see what happens. Just type it in. Like, that coupon code is unrecognizable. Or maybe they'll like charge you 10% more or something. Coupon code Wolfmueller. Oh, anyway, that'll be cool to see you guys at Issues Etc. if you can make it. Molly Hemingway and Mark are going to be there. That'll be cool to catch up with them. Jack Phillips, the baker from Colorado, he's a great guy. We used to go sit there and have coffee, have a little Bible study at his place. And my Masterpiece Cake Shop mug got broken the other day. Alas. I need to order another mug. And Robert George, that guy's big time. I've got a couple of Robert George books that I'm going to bring and see if he'll sign them for me. You think that's too nerdy? I don't think it is. I'm going to see if he'll sign the copy. He wrote a book on marriage, which is really nice. He's just been doing that. He's the think tank. I think Robert George might be the guy between this language of the romantic view of marriage versus the comprehensive view of marriage. I think that might be his language, which is really helpful. So anyway, I got to get him to sign my books. That'll be kind of cool. And I'll say, well, do you want me to sign a copy of my books? He's going to say, who are you? That'll be a fun little moment in time. And Hans Feeney's not talking. So that'll be great. That'll be the best part, No, Hans. That's me. Did you see that interview that he did with Wilkin? What am I just rambling for? This is really the Sunday drive home when I'm half delirious. Who else is going to be there? Will Whedon's going to be there. Oh, Dr. Rast is going to be there. Oh, this will be really interesting. If you guys like some of the stuff that I did in Has American Christianity Failed, then you'll really like Dr. Rast's presentation. I think he's talking about revivalism, the origins of revivalism, the character of revivalism, and I think he might actually host a revival at the conference. I don't know if that's on the schedule or not, but the dangers of revivalism and how it shaped American Christianity, that'll be a lot of fun to talk to. Dr. Rast is great. I remember at seminary, my first year at seminary, that I was sitting in a class, and the class next to us was always just roaring with laughter. And who is that professor in there that's doing like a stand-up comedy routine that the guys are just busting a gut all through class? And after like a week and a half of this, I'm like, I pretended like I had to go out to go to the bathroom so I could go and look who it was, and it was Dr. Rast. He's just a really funny, helpful, engaging, insightful. He would do class this way. I should pay attention to this because he was one of the best at classroom stuff. And he would set up the problem. Like he'd say, okay, here's the problem. And he would set it up so you would have to think through it yourself. So it wasn't like these are what happened, but it was like, here's what they were wrestling through. Like, so I remember him teaching us about the predestinarian controversy, and he would set up both sides to the question, and then he would have us sort of wrestle through that problem. So he saw church history as the series of the Holy Spirit helping the church wrestle through theological problems, and he would take us to the problem and let us wrestle through to see how we would come out, and then he would show how the church came out. So that was such a helpful way to think about church history. So Dr. Rast will be there. You guys can, if you haven't met him, you can meet him. That'll be kind of nice. So anyway, man, the Rambling Issues Etc. conference thing is longer than the video drive home. Aren't you home yet, Pastor Wolfmueller? Why don't you take a nap before you do these recordings? All right, thanks for hanging in there. Oh, if you're here at the end, I mean, probably you got to go to the conference, but also Wednesday Whatnot is helpful if you sign up for that. Also, this is helpful. I want to remind you guys that I'm going to stop this and I'm going to do this plug and put it before the other plug.